Welcome to the Global Government Forum webinar, Trusted Voice, How Government Communications Can Gain Trust in an Era of Misinformation. My name is Mia Hunt and I'm editor of globalgovernmentforum.com. Global Government Forum is a publishing events and research business that helps senior civil servants around the world to meet global challenges through building their expertise, knowledge and connections. We're delighted to be joined by 8x8, cloud communication software specialist, as the knowledge partner for this webinar. The importance of trust in government communications came to the fore during the COVID-19 pandemic, when getting public health messages out and encouraging compliance with lockdowns and restrictions was vital to curbing the rate of infections. However, governments are just one voice competing in a vast media ecosystem where social media can amplify less credible sources and the falsehoods they spread with damaging implications. This was evident during the pandemic, and the war in Ukraine is another example. So this webinar will look at the growing challenge of both misinformation and disinformation, the former being unintentional and the latter being deliberate deception, and what governments can do about it, including examples of best practice from around the world. We have a brilliant panel today, and we're going to start with short presentations from each of our three panelists, who I'll introduce you to in a moment. And we'll then move on to questions from you, the audience. So please do ask questions that come to mind at any time during the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll get through as many of those as we can. So on to the panelists now. We have Alex Aitken, Executive Director, Government Communications Service, Cabinet Office, UK. Alex is part of the senior leadership team in the Cabinet Office, with a responsibility for developing communication capability and campaigns and supporting the Chief Executive in leading and managing the Government Communications Service. He created the GCS and served as its head of profession until last year, responsible for communication strategy, cross-government campaigns, and managing the combined Prime Minister's Office and Cabinet Office communications team. He has trained and advised politicians and officials in countries and states around the world on communication strategy and practice. We also have with us today Viveka Richt, Director of Communications, Communication Unit, Ministry of Social Affairs and Health, Finland. Viveka started as Director of Communications in the Social Affairs and Health Department at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, taking charge of Finland's communications in the midst of the crisis. She is responsible for the organisation's communications, including stakeholder relations, media relations, and nationwide campaigning. She is also a member of the board of all three ministers within the ministry and of the ministry itself. Her background is in journalism, having worked in the Finnish broadcasting company for over a decade, both in Finland and as a foreign correspondent. And we are joined by Alexander Winterstein, Head of Unit, Communications Policy, General Affairs, Directorate General for Competition, European Commission. A former lawyer, Alexander first joined DG Competition in 1998, where he held various positions, including policy advisor to 2 directors general and a head of unit. Following time spent in other roles, including as the Commission's deputy chief spokesperson of the Austrian government, and as a visiting fellow at Yale University, Alexander returned to DG Competition to run its communications unit. He has steered a number of policy and communications projects, including the consultation and reflection process on the role of competition policy in support of the European Green Deal. So we're going to get some opening comments from each of the panelists, and I'll ask Alex to speak first. Alex, over to you.
Mia, thank you very much, and hello to Viveka and Alexander and all the other participants on this call. So this is about modern communication and mis and disinformation, but of course right back to the birth of government and communication, these have always been issues. The idea of brand being a mark that symbolized value, quality, was probably behind the pageantry of medieval governments and even before that, and has developed over the years. I think what is significant today is the growth in social and digital media, the fracturing of traditional media relationships, and to some extent the fracturing of trust we see as a result of financial, environmental and social crisis, makes public communications an ever more powerful tool and reducing the trust gap ever more important. Now, trust is easy to talk about and more difficult to do. And with governments, the trust gap is usually the difference between what they say they are going to do and what they actually do in practice, the extent to which their manifesto promises are not delivered or their values are not lived. I think in terms of addressing that issue, of the so far 6 British Prime Ministers I've worked for, I've always said to them or their teams, what is it you want your legacy to be? What do you wish to achieve when you leave office? And that North Star, that noble mission, is essential to delivering trust. Because if we are clear about what governments want to do and what prime ministers and presidents wish to achieve, then it is far easier to construct a story, to demonstrate delivery, to have clarity of objective in our communication work. I will give you a recent example of that from the United Kingdom. For years, we planned for the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, and that occurred after a long and successful reign in September this year. Now, we were fortunate that the head of state for the United Kingdom was a woman who was a paragon of many of the values we all aspire to in public service, in terms of dedication, in terms of sympathy, in terms of guiding the nation. But nevertheless, it struck me as we went through the 11 days of the funeral and watched the global reaction and indeed the national reaction. It was easier for the government and the royal family who we were supporting to maintain and indeed increase trust, because what the Queen embodied and what the new King promised seemed to meet with national aspiration, and supported by the pageantry of the funeral and the international guests and the way that people came together. Now, not all of us can have the luxury or indeed the misfortune of a royal funeral as part of our government regular engagement. But nevertheless, in terms of what that episode, now recent history, shows to me, in terms of clarity of objectives, in terms of preparation, in terms of shared objectives, and in terms of the fundamental integrity of the participants, I think it is a useful case study. I think we also have to recognise that democracy is messy, complicated, sometimes annoying, but also the last best hope of mankind. And when I look at the debates we have between countries and nations and whether a more authoritarian system is better, I'm ever more convinced when you look around the globe that countries that actually are enabled to release the talents and ambitions and aspirations of their people through democratic systems are far more likely to succeed in the long run than any other system, as history demonstrates. And public information is a hugely important part of making that happen. And when people ask me what I do for work, I say I provide the information that enables people to make good decisions about their lives. So timely, relevant, actionable information is absolutely essential for public trust. But we have to use that in the context of government to make sure that government's purpose and values and integrity are demonstrated throughout what they do. When between 2013 and 2015, we were helping the UK government through the aftershocks of the financial crash of 2008-9, I was very clear. My advice to the then Prime Minister and Finance Minister was, look, we need 4 things. Government, if it is to regain and maintain trust, needs to demonstrate a grip of the issues that people care about. It needs to demonstrate action. It needs to have a plan, a way of showing people the direction of where we're going. And it needs to provide individuals with agency, the ability to act on their own, in their own way, to help address the problem. And coming out of that recession and the job losses and the austerity and the reduced standard of living, which unfortunately is familiar to us in Europe today, the long-term economic plan that the government brought forward increased confidence in the government's economic handling of the economy by 40 percentage points over 2 years. Now, that was achieved through clarity of objectives, through discipline, through credible policies, through having a noble purpose. And there are more I could speak about around that campaign. The 500,000 business startups, the endorsement from the IMF and the OECD, and those external endorsements of any government's actions, any organization's actions, are hugely important in terms of building and maintaining trust. But nevertheless, that idea about the government gripped a public problem that the public cared about. We had brought forward a plan. We demonstrated action every week with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister over those 2 years would have done at least 200 individual events to demonstrate how the plan was working. There was feedback, there was insight, there was challenge. We spoke truth to power, and all those things from the perspective of a public communicator are what it takes to build and maintain trust. I was looking at the, I'll finish by talking a little bit about disinformation. I was looking about digital media trends around the world, and one of the findings from the excellent Reuters Institute report on digital media consumption over the past year has been, of course, the rise of TikTok. And the figures show that a large proportion of 16 to 24-year-olds get their news from TikTok. I've joined TikTok to work out what the hell is going on. There is a problem that we face, that news on TikTok is not like the broadsheet newspapers I still read in the morning, or indeed the BBC Evening News, where there is a full and comprehensive analysis of the issues on the page or across a 4 or 5 minute report on a particular issue. It is instant, it's instantaneous, it's entertaining, but it also tends online, and same is true of Facebook or Twitter, particularly. The news is broadcast in fragments. You hear pieces of news which are sometimes designed to excite or annoy rather than tell a rounded story. Now, that is an issue which we have to work on to counter mis and disinformation. In the UK, we work very closely with the tech companies to do so, and I commend our colleagues in the European Union for the work they've done as well. But I think I would finish by focusing on the fact that all public communication is now essentially digital, and sadly, therefore, all disinformation is usually digital. And to deal with that takes the ability of government to tell a compelling story which closes the say-do gap, the gap between governments, what governments say and what they actually do in practice. It takes great public communication to paint a picture and provide the information where people can make the right choices about their lives. And it requires the insight and evaluation from public communicators, so we monitor the trends, we understand when disinformation is beginning to infect public debate, and we deal with it immediately by countering it, but also by working with the tech companies to make sure it is minimized. Thank you very much, Mia, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Viveka, we will come on to you now.
Thank you, Mia, for the excellent introductions, and hello to everybody. I'm thankful for being here today, and sorry for the bad lighting. It's really dark in Finland already. So for the next few minutes, we will be concentrating in trust and transparency in inclusive Finland. What this means, that hopefully will transfer to you during the next few minutes. So may I have the next slide, please? Finland's been ranked as the most stable country, one of the best governed countries in the world. And it's also a country with the second freest press. And sorry, just got a new computer, so I've got some tiny little problems and hiccups. Please forgive me for those. So it's also a country with the second freest press and the most trusted news media. We also have a political system that gives a voice to everyone, and government that's both effective and accountable. That's what we like to think. What we also like to think is that the government and the public sector, they work for all citizens, not the other way around, nor just for a chosen few. So the next one, please. It's important for us to be able to trust not just our friends and neighbors, but also public authorities and officials. This is something that is in the core of Finnishness. And Finland consistently ranks at or near the top in international surveys comparing levels of trust in different societies. Trust in such public institutions as the police and the legal system, media, politicians, and even taxation. And of course, trust in one's fellow citizens. The next one, please. At the start of COVID-19 pandemic, we started to collect organized and standardized data on how are people feeling regarding the society, how are they trusting it and its workings. The next slides are derived from that extensive survey. So the next one, please. The survey tells us, for example, that even in the aftermath of COVID-19, we still trust our institutions, as you can see from the slide. The government's scores have varied, as you can see, throughout the pandemic, but have stayed in well over 50% all the time. And also, that you can see from the slide, is that the defense forces of Finland have highest ranking. We started measuring its trust only in the spring this year, after Russia had started the war against Ukraine. And if you check the line, you see that there's a strong upsurge in trusting the government during the same period in the spring. You might say that when the going gets tough, Finns unite against a common enemy, were it COVID or some nameless neighboring country. So the next one, please. This reflects also to the communications about the pandemic. As you can see, in Finland, we did not really have to fight against misinformation coming from social media influencers or like-minded politicians. On the contrary, the right people were ones who were trusted throughout the crisis and almost by everyone. We did have a small minority who had the tendency to trust misinformation or disinformation, but let's get to that a bit later. So I said that the right people were the ones who were trusted, and with the right people, I mean the National Health Institute, researchers, and also us, the government officials. A very high percentage of Finns trusted the messages we were delivering, even though the trust in our official communications has been fluctuating. As you can see, we still have quite okay ratings. Not for long, though, if we are not careful. And why I'm not celebrating more can be seen from the next slide. Overall, some 65 to 70% of respondents rated the government officials' communications as being either very good or fairly good during the pandemic. And this means we have a huge amount of people who were mostly indifferent, but also the ones who were downright in opposition with us. Those who were in opposition were usually also in political opposition. For example, supporters of Prime Minister Sanna Marin's Social Democratic Party, they were overall quite satisfied. But the very right-wing Finns party voters were less inclined to trust the information provided by official sources. The Finns party channels certain groups who sense that they or their thoughts have no place or relevance in the society. They feel alienated or socially excluded. And these are the people we are at risk to lose from our radar. And their trust we have already lost. And that we can see on the next slide. So here, the amount of people feeling they live in an unjust society has more than doubled during the COVID-19 pandemic. This to us is very alarming. How to stop this development? Not by means of communications, no, it needs a thorough examination of our society, but there's always something we can focus on. And the next, please. for us at the moment, the focus is in openness and inclusion. Openness means freedom of information and communication, as well as opportunities for citizens and for civil society to improve the way that society operates by getting involved. So we are trying to involve people and the civil society. And this is why in Finland we encourage a dialogue between civil society and government. Government-funded programs, for example, free of charge public education, hospitals, health clinics, public daycare, they are seen as a way to give everyone a fair and equal chance to pursue one's freedom. That's a big wording there, but that's what we are doing. And therefore, those themes we need to concentrate at, also in the communications, but also by means of doing things. So the next, please. Open government strategy, that's a key resource in Finnish society. It builds trust, security, and confidence in the future amongst citizens. As you can see, we emphasize on everyone being included in the society. We talk about concepts like reinforcing dialogue or everyone's right to understand and be understood and ensuring the opportunity to participate. So basically in Finland, we firmly believe that fairness and inclusion are the keys for better communication, a well-functioning society in which mis or disinformation or malinformation is not as big a threat as in another kind of society. So this from Finland and from me now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Alexander, we will come on to you now, please.
Hello, good afternoon. It is still daylight here in Brussels as opposed to Finland. So thank you very much both to Alex and to Vivica for their presentation. I will probably speak a little bit more about the misinformation and disinformation. In the moment we are dealing here in Brussels, of course, with both phenomena on an almost daily basis. We have issues of wrong information, misinformation, myths about what Europe does and doesn't do, that we're trying to correct and to fight every day. But of course, we also have the more robust attacks in terms of information in the context of from the invasion of Crimea to the invasion of Ukraine. The Brexit debate, of course, was a difficult one in terms of accuracy of information, and of course, COVID, as Vivica has already mentioned. And all these, be it misinformation or disinformation, is very problematic because it confuses citizens. It increases distrust. It increases polarization. So even in Finland, as Vivica was explaining there, wrong information in the context of COVID has also led to polarizing even a very harmonious society like the Finnish one. And in doing so, it really undermines the effectiveness of the public response, for example, in a healthcare situation like COVID. So it's really, the way we see it, a risk to open society, which is also why the response to it, in our view, must be based and anchored in common values and must involve our democratic and strong institutions. And by values, of course, what I mean there is freedom of expression and free and pluralistic media. And by doing that, by anchoring our response on values and on our institutions, I'm quite sure that we are also increasing the resilience of our societies facing those challenges like COVID or like now the Russia-Ukraine situation. I think it's the point that Alex has also made, the resilience of society and the resilience of our model, which we believe is really the best one for our people, for our citizens, needs to be preserved. Now, Mia, you mentioned the the difference between misinformation and disinformation. I don't want to go into semantics too much, but I think it's an important distinction because depending on what we are talking about, our reaction will be different. So when you look at misinformation, as you referred to, so the false or inaccurate, misleading information, but without any harmful intent, that can be addressed by a proactive communication, by truthful, reliable information being put out there, by rebuttals, but also by raising awareness of people like that they have to look what the source is, where does the information come from, how reliable, how trustworthy does it look? That's a question of literacy, media literacy, but digital literacy, because as Alex has rightly pointed out, this is all digital now. And that we're trying to do in the Commission in various ways. A big role is played by our representative offices that we have in every member state, where our colleagues from Finland to Austria, Ireland, Portugal, wherever they are, Prague, are looking at the national stories, the national narratives, and trying to rebut and correct and rectify them there. So there's a lot of myth busting going on, and you would be very surprised, or maybe not, about the range and sometimes incredible nature of these myths going around. But they're there, they're spread very actively, and so they need to be countered. Here in Brussels, what we're trying to do is, of course, be strong on social media channels. For example, our president has, I think, 1.3 million Twitter followers and more than 2 million followers on LinkedIn. So there's a big range of people we can use. And we're trying to be very open, very transparent, very forthcoming, very truthful with the media and therefore the public by way of communicating to them. We have a press conference every day here in Brussels. We are putting out documents, press releases, speeches, speaking points, etc. I think we had almost 4,000 since this commission started in December 2019, and we had in our press room here in Brussels more than 1,000 press events, press conferences, background briefings for journalists, technical briefings, etc. So here we're really trying to be as transparent and as upfront and proactive as possible. Let me add a caveat there, a challenge that we are facing, probably more than our colleagues in the member states, like in particular Viveka was referring to that. The issues that we are dealing here in Brussels very often are kind of complex, technical, not always intuitively very close to people's hearts and minds. And therefore, there's always a challenge for us not to become technical in our language, not to talk jargon, not to talk and communicate in a way where even journalists find it difficult to figure out what exactly is it that we are saying. That's a constant challenge that we are aware of, something that we're working on, not to come across as paternalistic and institutional communicators, because people maybe outside Finland do not really trust institutional communication so much. So really try to engage people, appeal to their curiosity, to their eagerness to learn. It's perhaps working. There are regular surveys by a company called Eurobarometer testing a number of things, including how much people trust the institutions. And so we see that on average, Europeans trust the European institutions quite a lot more than national institutions. Finland, of course, being an exception here, as Viveka has explained. That is not a consolation, because the trust in the European institutions, although much higher than in national institutions, is still, to my taste at least, not high enough. So, and I think clear communication is a good way of increasing trust there. So that's misinformation. And then, Mia, you mentioned disinformation as well, and that's a different story altogether, because that's false, misleading information, but with an intent. And the intent is to undermine our societies or to have an economic advantage. And that requires a different, much more robust, much more sort of also creative approach. You need strong capabilities to do that as well. I'm not going through all the measures that we have taken at European level, because for the introductory statement, that would be too long, but we've done a lot of things, generally speaking, but also in particular with regard to COVID, in particular with regards to disinformation by Russia in particular, because disinformation is one of the tools that foreign actors use when they trying to influence our elections, our society, try to polarize our society, try to weaken our society. And when I say society, I say this with a purpose, because I think that our response must be an all of society response. It is the European institutions, it is the member states institutions, civil society, organizations, fact checkers, citizens, really everybody needs to be on board, needs to be on the same page. And from the institutional point of view, of course, there is a legislative response, there is a communication response, but there's also an external action response, like, for example, sanctions with regard to certain Russian news sources that have played a role here. And let me finish, Mia, with one thought, and that is that when you look at foreign influence actions and campaigns that use disinformation, it's easy to sort of only look at the content of what is being said. But in a way, just looking at the content, because disinformation, it's really that, it's packages of content, if you want, flying around. And if we focus on the content only, I think we're missing a big part of the picture. We're missing all the other factors within which this packages of information are traveling. And I'd like to use an image that Maria Ressa has used a few times already, where she said that disinformation is the bullet and behavior is the gun. And we need to focus on the gun as much as on the bullet. In other words, we need to look at what are the cognitive, the societal, and all the other frailties that are being exploited. What is done in order to capture our attention? What is done to engineer trust, to engineer credibility wrongly? What is done to trigger our emotions? All this needs to be assessed. We need to look at what are the channels being used to, for example, to bring people into subgroups and sub-identities where they feel it's us versus them situation, and where they look for information, for facts completely differently from you and me and us here on this call. So that is what we need to address. What are the channels, the techniques, the tactics used? And I think it's really important to look at that as much as we're looking at the actual content. In other words, the bullet. I'm probably gonna leave it here. Maybe one last thought, because Alex mentioned TikTok, a very pertinent observation. I also think we don't have to react to each and every piece of misinformation or disinformation, in particular misinformation that we see. We need to check what's the channel of transporting this piece of misinformation. Because if it's a newspaper with a limited range is one thing. If it's on TikTok, well, then obviously it's going to be seen by a lot of people. So we need to move with the times and then update our toolkit as we go along. So I'm going to stop here. I'm happy to take questions together with my two co-panelists.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to the three of you for those opening comments. We will go to the Q&A session now, and we are getting loads of questions in, which is brilliant. So thank you very much to the audience. Keep those coming. The first one we got in, and Alexander, you've spoken about this, but it's from Susan Fleming, and it's about misinformation. What is it, and who determines what it is? I know, Alexander, you did touch on that, but is there any ambiguity there? You know, if a piece of information is spreading online and it comes to governments attention and communication teams are gathering to discuss whether a response is needed, is there ambiguity as to whether that is misinformation or perhaps it's not? Does that sort of factor into strategy and conversations around response in certain situations?
I think this is a very pertinent question, because not every point of view taken by somebody which is not the same as your own point of view is misinformation. It's very important, and that's why I was talking about the values at the beginning of my talk. When we respond to misinformation or disinformation, now in this case, Mia, your question, or rather Mr. Fleming's question was about misinformation, if I understood you correctly, acoustically. The response to that must be based on our core values, and the freedom of expression is one of our core values. So there cannot be, and there is not, a ministry of truth or a commissioner of truth who will decide that a certain point of view we don't like and therefore it's misinformation. I did not come across cases of misinformation where you would have a doubt, is that right or is that wrong? Because when I think about COVID, when I think about many other stories that are being told about what Europe is doing or not doing, they're very often quite obviously and blatantly wrong. And they're very often shared without any intent, at least without any malicious intent. They are being shared very often because it suits, for example, a national political agenda. Let's not forget the European Union. Now it's made of 27 member states, so 27 national politics. And having been in national politics myself, I can only confirm what I'm sure Alex and Vivica have also experienced. There is a national political context. There are national stories and narratives, and then the question is, how does the EU fit in? And very often the EU fits in very well as a scapegoat, as an excuse for not doing anything, or for blaming somebody else for which oneself actually is responsible. And if this is inaccurate, well, then it's for us to point out the facts. One more point on this that's also important to me: when we see spinning, so not disinformation, just spinning, not saying the full truth or contextualizing it in a way that we don't agree with, we will come back with the facts. We will not come back with the spin. That's not something that we do. So we will always tell the full story, and we will always give the full facts. And I think, and that's really my concluding remark, that was already too long as a response, I really think that the credibility of the European institutions is based on the very fact that we are giving the full story, the full information, nothing but the facts. That makes us sometimes boring, technocratic, not very easy to listen to, not very pleasant to listen to sometimes, but intrinsically, this is, I think, where our credibility comes from.
Thank you for your answer there. There was a second part to Susan's question, so I'll ask that now and then maybe put both parts to Vivica and to you, Alex, as well. So the second part is, she says we should embrace differing views. The response to COVID varied between countries with different outcomes, for example. And she says that science can only progresses if people dispute the conventional narrative. Do we want the state to control the narrative around scientific matters in a free society? Vivica, I will come to you first, if that's okay, both on the definition and that point about disseminating scientific information during pandemics and other such circumstances.
So could you please re-ask the question? I didn't quite catch it. So do we
Yes.
need to?
So Susan said we should embrace differing views. The response to COVID varied between countries with different outcomes, for example. And she says that science only progresses if people dispute the conventional narrative. Do we want a state to control the narrative around scientific matters in a free society? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yes, we actually, in a way, we have been working around this phenomenon since the start of COVID, as you probably have in different countries also. And what we were basically doing were that we needed to open all possible doors for different kinds of views. So we did not try to control the narrative, but we did actually exactly what Alexander just said. We confronted it with facts. That's the only thing that we can do. We can't say that, hey, you are wrong there, you are wrong there, or start punishing people for talking the non-truth in a way. So when we talk about the official narrative, we try to push it in every possible way, in every possible channel, in every possible group, target group, in a way that they will take the facts from the narrative and start to translate it to their own language, so to speak. So basically what I'm trying to say is that you can't control the narrative, and you just have to try to make it so that the facts will be correct, and to allow openness also in these kinds of situations.
Thank you. Alex, do you have a view on that?
Yes, I do. Partly because I reread Karl Popper's Enemies of a Free Society, which is a hugely important and influential book. I don't quite agree with Susan. I mean, I think part of the point of what Popper was arguing is that history is not written in the Hegelian and Marxian theories that said society will eventually progress to the triumph of world history or the perfect state of communism. What he was arguing was actually you have to challenge, you have to debate, and you have to come up with the sort of the debates that are typical of all the societies that we live in. And you're really aware as a government communicator that, of course, you can influence part of the people some of the time, but there are a rich, varied, vocal traditional media. There are increasingly people, as on Twitter or Facebook, we act as our own editors and producers of content. So I think that process is alive and well. Science obviously progresses when people debate and discuss. I don't think it's entirely accurate to say that people dispute the conventional narrative. No one is going to start arguing that, well, cancer doesn't come from cancerous cells, but actually comes from some sort of miasma. Though it is true that that sometimes the conventional narrative needs to be tested. The experience of the United Kingdom in COVID, there were some brilliant innovations like the vaccine. There were some very successful campaigns. There are moments when we could and should have done better, but I'm very proud of the role that public information played in that sort of crisis. Direct public information is essential for trust and the agency and action that I talked about earlier. The press conferences that we put on, who knew that in the 21st century a government was going to reinstitute daily press conferences, a tool I think we thought had gone out with the 20th century, but they would get up to 30 million viewers. I think what was interesting, one of the things we implemented during the press conferences, which goes to a later question, was around the ability of the public to ask questions of the leading politicians and scientists and the chief medical officer during those press conferences. And what surprised us was over the period, we got nearly 800,000 questions from members of the public, and a representative question was asked, independently chosen. The politicians had no knowledge of the specific questions that we asked at the press conference. It also gave us a database of public concerns, which was interesting because it differed slightly to the concerns that the journalists raised in the press conferences. So that was a way of both understanding what the public were concerned about, allowing them to ask the question, and generating an audience to listen to the advice that government was giving in that crisis situation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you were referring there to a question that's coming from Jeff Coate, who says he's curious to know, just lost it, hold on. Curious to know if there's a true democracy where members of the public can participate in government forums or parliamentary sessions and then vote on matters. and how you measure the influence placed on government officials, politicians, or even the public in such circumstances. So, Vivica, do you have a view on that? Sort of goes along with what you were saying earlier, perhaps on inclusivity. You're on mute there, Vivica.
Excellent,
Okay.
thank you. Maybe that might help also with my hearing, because for some reason I can't hear you too well. Could you please point out where is the question so that I can read it?
Sure, it's from Jeff Coate, and it should be the second one in the list now, if you look at the window. But he says he's curious to know if there is true democracy where members of the public can participate in government forums or parliamentary sessions and then vote on matters.
Just a second, for some reason I have technical problems, so sorry for those. So I'm not quite sure what you mean, Jeff, by asking that if there is a true democracy where members of the public can participate in government forums. When they vote matters online. What we do in Finland actually is when we promote open government and open society, we make the so-called citizen initiatives. So people can, if they think that there is a part of legislation which is wrong or is missing, for example, the same-sex marriage. This is just an example of how we do things in Finland. So people, they suggested through this initiative platform that we need to have a possibility for same-sex marriage in Finland. And so they made a petition online, and through this platform, they collected 170,000 names. That's a huge amount in Finland. And you need 50,000 in order to get this initiative into the parliament. So basically, people use these kinds of tools in order to get into the conversation with the government or with the parliament. So in this case, I would say that it's really a true democracy where people use these kinds of tools in a way that we are trying to use them in Finland. But what you are suggesting that people would be let into the panels or discussions in which they would vote for which kind of things should the government be talking, if I understand correctly, and that probably would not be the true democracy as we think that it should be. But yes, the case of Finland at least is very much different to what you are suggesting in your question. But thank you. It's a really important question to have. Thanks.
Thank you. Alexander, would you like to come in on that, or shall I move on to another question?
I don't have much to say on that question. I saw one from Justin a bit further down the list, who, if I remember well, asked if you have a robust reaction to disinformation, how do you avoid sort of putting people off who are already sort of not trusting institutional communication so much? And I think this is a very good question. And there are several answers. The first very practical thing I'd like to say and to ask Justin, but also everybody else who is listening to do, is to check out the website called EU versus Disinfo, which is run by our External Action Service. There is since 7 years now, a task force working there, looking at identifying disinformation campaigns, especially by Russia, making them public. And so you can go there, you can see what the Russians have been doing and are doing, and you can also see the way it is being dealt with. And I think there, what you will see there is that there are a number of techniques. You can point out obvious inconsistency of what Russian propaganda is saying, in a way that even those who do not necessarily trust me as an institutional communicator, but they will see that sort of the patently inconsistent messages they're putting out. You can enumerate, sort of show certain statements, and then you actually can demonstrate next to it. You can do it on a kind of infographic. I have some of them here from the website, where you put the myth and the truth next to each other. When you see that, even if you don't necessarily trust me in the first place, but when you see that there, you will, I think, be persuaded that at least there's something that needs to be checked, and that's already a very important step. If we can make people check the source and go a bit further than just listening to Russia Today or Sputnik, then I think that's a very big step, because when people will be checking, they will be finding the truth. What you can also do is to expose in advance, it's a kind of a pre-bunking if you want, to make very transparent how propaganda works, for example, from the Kremlin's point of view. So what they would first do is they would say, oh, this never happened, whatever it is. They would say, oh, this never happened. Then when it's obvious that it did happen, they would say, oh, but it was a provocation, we were provoked. Now, if that's obviously wrong, then the next thing would say, oh, but you know, this Ukrainians, they're Nazis anyway. In fact, everybody's a Nazi who is doing something which is not according to the Kremlin's wishes. Now, if that turns out to be wrong, the next thing is to say, yeah, well, but this or that Western country staged it. Now, and if that turns out to be wrong, it comes to famous whataboutism. So you would say, okay, maybe that's all true, but what about what the Americans are doing? What about what the UK is doing? Or so just trying to divert attention elsewhere. And if that doesn't work, then you just repeat the whole cycle from the very beginning. So if you make that apparent for people to see, without saying believe me because I am trustworthy. No, that's not what you say. It's just that look for yourself, look what's happening, and we're telling already now what's going to happen in a week's time, because it's always the same. And let me conclude on that point by another practical example. There is the fake story about Ukraine running biolabs to produce biological weapons. Now, the classic response by bureaucrats would be to say, "Oh, that's wrong. Now, you know that there are no such labs that produce biological weapons." But then, of course, the skilled propagandist would say, "Yeah, Alexander, it's funny that you say that, but there are biolabs in Ukraine, right?" And then you would have to say, well, yeah, there are biolabs everywhere. Every country has biological laboratories for vaccines and for other stuff. Yes, of course, they do exist. And then we say, oh, Alexander, interesting that you admit. So you admit that. Okay. And some of those maybe are co-financed by the European Union, by other Western organizations. And then we say, yeah, okay, but that's for scientific purpose, et cetera. So it becomes very defensive. They deliberately get you into a cycle of defensive argumentation. And because you are always honest and truthful as an institutional communicator, you're always on the back foot. So I think instead of doing that, what you can do and what we have tried to do is to say, look, this biolab myth, we've seen that before. It was used in 2014 at the occasion of invading Crimea. It was wrong at the time. We saw it in 2016 in Syria. It was wrong then. We saw it in 2020, first time in Ukraine. It was wrong. And it is not any more true now. And if you give that kind of context, I think you go a long way of making people realize that there is a technique behind this, there's a strategy behind this, there's a propaganda behind this. And by using that, by being open, transparent, and telling people what's going on, and then telling them, make up your own mind, make up your own opinion, check your own facts, go and have alternative sources, and then you you form your own opinion. I think that's the way to do it without sounding like sort of trying to convince you of my view. That's not what we want to do. We want to make you think twice when you hear this nonsense coming from Russian propaganda and from, of course, other sources of misinformation, disinformation, sorry, not misinformation, disinformation.
Thank you, Alexander. On the question there of how to respond without risking further alienating people, Viveka, can I ask you about that one, please?
Well, that is the problem. If I had the answer to that question, I think that we'd solve a million of problems. But there's what I think, from my point of view, I think that the only way to battle that is to open everything and to be as transparent as possible in order to give people the feeling that they know every possible thing about the subject, that they are being heard, and to their questions we give the answers as truthfully as is possible. So basically opening up everything is probably the only way to try to manage the situation here. Thank you.
And Alex.
So we have a relatively sophisticated formula for this, and I agree with what Alexander and Viveka have said as well, particularly in terms of transparency and the integrity of your own communications in the particular case of dealing with disinformation. But the toolkit which we deploy will only intervene if something is particularly offensive, particularly potentially damaging, dividing society and so on. So there's a lot of conversation that will continue that may be misleading, because the public and citizens are entitled to say things in a free society in the way that they choose, which doesn't actually do damage. And I think recognizing when things, and I think Alexander's example is one of those things that could do damage, I think you have to set a fairly high bar for intervention before, to avoid the issue that the questioner has set out.
Thank you, Alex. We've also got a question from someone. Alexander, you mentioned that tool where you might have a piece of disinformation and a fact side by side, so people could make a sort of a choice, if you like. Somebody has asked whether there are governments that are planning to introduce a tool whereby people can filter information, where it would give sort of accurate results as to whether that is disinformation, misinformation, or otherwise. Are there such tools that you know of? Alex.
Sorry, Mia, was that for me or for somebody else?
For Alex. First,
for Alex,
please.
okay.
I'm sorry. So I've looked at the tool mentioned. It appears to be a commercial tool, and it gives you a rating of where the various. I was looking at the Woodland Daily Democrat, and its assessment is its accuracy of reporting is high and its least biased. Look, I think that we go down quite an interesting path if we start trying to get fact checkers to check media in a free society. And I know if I open a tabloid newspaper in the UK, it will have a more dramatic and more emotional take on the same news I could read in the Financial Times, which would be closer to the model that Alexander has described from the European Union in terms of being factual and calm. But people need the right to choose their news in the way that they see fit. When I was in the United States recently, I read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, radically different takes on the same issues. But I think the question, rather than engaging fact checkers, is to build media literacy. That starts in school. I think we need to work with the big tech platforms. If you look at the way Facebook is now producing monthly reports on coordinated inauthentic behavior on its sites, I think that's the step forward. I think what that shows is that there's no single silver bullet to tackle the problem of inauthentic behavior online or disinformation. But I think that we need to hold fast to the fact that credible news services can challenge one another. Thank you.
Thank you. Vivica, you've got your hand up, so we'll come to you.
Thank you. So actually being of the same side with Alex here, it all starts with media literacy. And I answered by a message to this question that we have in Finland. We have this place called Faktabaari, so it's a facts bar, faktabaari.fi, which has been running since 2014, and it's regularly contributed to fact-based information circulation with innovative projects and so on and so forth. But it's basically it's been put together by journalists of their own will. So we can't force this, as Alex just said, we can't force this in a society. That won't be a free society or open society anymore. We can't say that this is a fact or this is not a fact. If we have a fact government or a fact EU regulating facts. But that would be something else than democracy. So we have these journalists who are willingly taking their time in order to serve the public for this fact checking. And it also in Finland we start media literacy already in public school when kids are around 6 to 7 years old. So basically it covers the whole education ladder from primary school to university, and media education, media literacy is part of the curricula. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe Mia, just to add from the European side, of course, we have now the Digital Services Act, which the purpose of which really is to make the internet a safe place for citizens to interact and to move around really. And there are obligations on the very large social networks and platforms and search engines. So if they go above a certain number of users, I think it's 45 million, then they have fairly far-reaching obligations with regard to removing illegal content. Now, we are not talking about illegal content here. We're talking about legal content, which it represents mis or disinformation. But when it comes to illegal content, hate speech, etc., so they're very far-reaching obligations now. And one should also say that there is a code of practice signed by the big platforms, but also advertising industry and others. I think already 2018 has just been extended and renewed and broadened in 2022. So I think this is very important because, as both Alex and Vivica have pointed out, this is where it happens. It happens on these platforms, and so it's very important to engage the responsibility of these platforms as well. And I think that the Digital Services Act will be a very good tool and will really set the standards beyond Europe as well when it comes to the safety of the internet and of social media for citizens in Europe.
Thank you very much. I want to move on now to capability in communications teams and data as well. There are stories about governments in various countries struggling with data visualizations and data dissemination around infection rates and other aspects of the pandemic, and the way that data was presented during briefings to the public. Presenting citizens with evidence is likely to become more and more important. So just how important is it that communications teams have the data skills and the capabilities? Vivica, I'll come to you first, please.
Thanks. Thank you for the question. The so-called infographics and other kinds of visual aids have been a growing thing for a few years now. And what we have done is that we have a person who is specialized in our team to do all these kinds of things. But we also recognize that it cannot be just us who are doing this, so we are also buying from outside. So I wouldn't say that it's a basic need for every communications team. It makes things easier if you have an inside man or woman to doing these things, but you can also have a lot of this kind of service bought in a very good price actually, and a very good value, I would say. So not that important.
Okay, thanks. Alex, your view on that, please.
So when I go to the National Gallery up the road in Trafalgar Square, one of my favourite portraits is that of Cardinal Richelieu, the great French statesman. And of course, that was a massive piece of visualization, less data, more visualization. But the idea about using visual images in communication has been with us for a very, very long time. A lot of great European artists were there to produce pictures that would defend and extend and explain the state. I think what is true is that modern public service communication is dominated by video, by visual, by voices, credible voices, and we've talked a little bit about that. We had to learn quickly in terms of, as Viveka has said, relearning the skills of data visualization during COVID, and the slides that were presented at every press conference that demonstrated the rate of vaccination, the state of the virus in the population, were things we had to be really clear and understood that the data we were presenting was accurate visually and accurate in terms of the statistics. And we have invested a great deal in this. So I, as a press officer who joined or started work in 1992 with a basic computer and a fax machine, I now recognize that unless we are able to take pictures, produce videos and visualize data, we will not be able to meet the expectations of those who we work for, and more importantly, the public we serve. Thank you.
Alexander, come to you now.
I can only sort of agree with and really underline what both Viveka and Alex have said. Visuals is really what we do. We have fact sheets for everything major that we produce in all the languages, of course, because we cater to 27 audiences, speaking more than 27 languages almost. So we have to do that. We are doing that, and of course, our information to a very large part takes place on social media. On all the channels. So therefore, without visuals, you really don't get very far. And that's a real challenge. I'd like to say that here, because there's still a lot of things that we do, which is not easy to put into a visual. But we're trying to do that because we have realized since quite a long time that this is absolutely key. In addition to animations, short video clips, etc., that we are using more and more. And final remark. You may have seen that our president, Ursula von der Leyen, during the COVID pandemic has been out there a lot using videos, and so therefore addressing Europeans directly via these video messages on social media, but also on TV. And I think that has worked very well.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have a few minutes left, so I'll get on to one final question, which sort of has two parts to it. So how do you expect the battle against disinformation and misinformation to play out in the coming years in terms of its effect on government policy, public services, citizens, etc.? And in an ideal world, how would you hope that it plays out? And hand in hand with that, what do you see for the same of public trust in the years to come? Alex, I will come to you first.
Thank you. So look, we've been here before. The invention of the printing press allowed 1,000 opinions to bloom, be printed, be circulated, and a one-to-many form of communication where the king or the pope said this is how it goes, and that was communicated through the pulpits, changed to a many-to-many, and we're going through another information revolution, and that has happened but only accelerated over the past few years. I think the worrying thing, judged by the data, the Reuters Institute digital media report being my source, is that more and more people are tuning out of news because they find it depressing. You can see the statistics, less so in Helsinki, more so in London, a lot more in Washington. So there is people turning away from news. I think this is partly because of the consecutive shocks that affected the world, the recession in the 2008-9, the COVID pandemic, more recently the war, and all that brings and will bring this winter and next winter. So there's a massive challenge for governments and trust, and that's why the Global Government Forum are right to hold this seminar today. What we will do is, number one, work with partners across Europe and indeed around the free democratic world, and countries working together through mechanisms like the G7 and with the European Union, I think is part of that. Our motto for the work that we do in government communication in the UK is truth told well. And my remit is to explain, justify and defend what the government does, the government being democratically elected. And we will redouble our efforts to do that. And certainly I have seen over the 10 years I worked in the UK government, much greater interest, much greater sophistication, much higher quality of delivery of public information that I believe maintains trust in our institutions. But the world is going through a rocky time, an uncertain, a volatile time, and it is ultimately the judgments to be made by people based on the way that their democracies, their politicians, their institutions perform. So we can contribute, but the battle against disinformation is real. It is not yet won. The battle for public trust is constant and ongoing, but by working together, I think that we can prevail. Thank you.
Thank you. Viveka, over to you, please, on how the battle against misinformation, disinformation might play out and on public trust in future.
Thank you for the question, and all I can do is agree with Alex with most parts of what he said. And what we are doing in Finland, we obviously think that we are going to win this battle. It's an ongoing battle though, so not sure if it's winnable or not, but we are doing our best. And what I said about reinforcing dialogue is one of the things that we think that might help with this, and dialogue between governments and the civil society is the key in this. And what was actually said right in the beginning of this webinar was said something that we have to try to communicate without jargon, without the government jargon. We have to communicate in a way that that people understand, and that is something that is everybody's right. Everyone has a right to understand and be understood, and these are the things that I think that if we put this into action and we really try to concentrate on these, we have a better possibility to survive with our well-working society. Also literacy, media literacy, and the normal literacy. These are the things that will be getting us there, I think. Thanks.
Thanks very much. On the point of jargon, I think New Zealand has recently passed a bill that bans jargon from government communications just in the last few weeks. So that's interesting. Alexander, your final comments, please.
I agree with Alex on the danger of society sort of disintegrating into echo chambers, and everybody sitting in his echo chamber consuming tailor-made news served up by algorithms, and that really destroys the sort of the space for exchanging views, for arguing together about the big themes. The loss of the influence of mainstream media that Alex mentioned is real, and it's very linked to this concern. I have to say, on the other hand, I do have the feeling that in recent years, and we saw that at the most recent European elections, there's also a growing space, at least within the European Union, about topics where people have realized that they're really European topics. I think the message is getting through that questions like climate change, which is actually a global topic, not even a European topic, but climate change, migration, the economic situation, and COVID, of course, these are not issues that member states can deal with successfully on their own. These are European issues, and therefore there is more than a national interest at stake, and therefore an Austrian like myself will become European and talk to Vivica Finn as a European, having a shared interest here and a shared concern. And I think this is getting through to a certain extent. So that's the silver lining that I see. But of course, it's only a silver lining, whereas the challenge that Alex and also Vivica have identified is definitely real. The remedies are very much the ones that Alex and Vivica have mentioned, in particular cooperation from G7 to NATO within the EU and partners beyond. I would really stress the all of society approach. We need to really engage with everybody. It cannot be a conversation like we are having here amongst government or institutional communicators. Must be much broader. And for the European Union, for us here in Brussels, of course, we need to engage a lot with audiences that are local and national. And there we need to work with national and local partners. We cannot from Brussels effectively communicate in 27 member states. That needs to come bottom up. And a final point, what I said in the beginning about clarity of language, I think this is something where we have a lot to learn actually from our British friends who are better capable, I think, at least to my taste, to express themselves, clearly, succinctly, so we're continuing to improve our language here, and hopefully this will help in the long run.
Thank you very much to all of you for those closing comments. This is where I will bring the webinar to a close. I'm sure you'll all agree there were some fascinating insights there into what governments can do to tackle misinformation and disinformation and all of the issues around that. And we hope that you found it useful. Thanks very much to our panel, our knowledge partner 8x8, and to you in the audience for watching. You will be receiving a recording of the webinar in the next few days and also a report on the topics covered in the next few weeks. Before that though, there'll be a survey that should be in your inbox soon to get your thoughts on today's session, and it would really help the team here at Global Government Forum to make sure that we're providing the best possible content for you. Any ideas on topics you'd like to see us cover in future webinars would be very welcome as well. We have a whole host of webinars coming up. One of the next ones on the 13th of December is on how governments can tackle illicit finance. So if you'd like further information on that, or would like to see a list of the webinars we have coming up over the next few weeks and months, head over to globalgovernmentforum.com to the homepage, click on webinars under the events tab. So once again, thanks to everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you at another one of our webinars soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.